This is College Football with Sam. Welcome back, fellow football fanatics. We have a lot to talk about, and I know it's late at night, but stuff happened today. Very impactful things happened today. In fact, they happened not too long ago. So I want to talk about those tonight, and those are the recent commits that, whether it was today with Kyron Hudson going to Penn State from USC, whether it was Michigan picking up 3 commits in an hour, or whether it's from the past few days where Oregon has been aggressive in the portal at the highest level, Minnesota has been trying to bring in as many bodies as possible to add in depth and replace some critical outgoing starters. And I also in this video want to talk about why I believe Indiana, Penn State, and Ohio State win their games this Friday for Indiana against Notre Dame, and Saturday for Penn State against SMU and Ohio State against Tennessee. By the way, just a little bit of an itch there, I'm going to be live reviewing those games and doing play-by-play, color commentary, the best that I can for all 4 of the college football playoff first-round games, in particular the ones that feature Big Ten teams. Maybe I will go live for Texas-Clemson, maybe not. Actually got good viewership on that video this week, so I'm tempted to say that I will. We'll just have to see how all that goes, but I plan on going live for the majority, if not all, of the college football playoff first-round games. So make sure, if you haven't already, to like the video, but more importantly, to hit that subscribe button and also click the notification bell so that you can get notified when I release new content here on College Football with Sam, and also when I go live, like right now or Friday and Saturday when I'll be live reviewing those playoff games. I'll also go live once more in between now and Thursday night. Date to be determined on that one, but likely it will be Wednesday at like 6 or 7 p.m. is when I will go live next. So I just wanted to keep you guys updated with all that. I am tired. I will say that right now, but that is because, well, there's just been a lot to process, and I know what's coming ahead, which is going to be a long stream. And that's, again, because we have a lot to talk about here. I mean, think about it this way. Michigan and Penn State have not known to be very active in the portal. And yet it seems like we're not even in the spring window yet. We're not even done and really close when it comes to commitments, finished with the winter portal window. And Penn State's already got a big commit. Michigan has a few. Ohio State is still searching for a commitment, and I think they'll get a few. I do, because they do have a lot of money, and they're a program that I think people want to, go to. I saw that, just looking at the chat here, Deion Sanders in Colorado got Jaheim Otis from Alabama, defensive tackle. I also saw that Michigan State got another commit, Joshua Eaton from Texas State, and they got a few commits in the past few days. We'll talk about Michigan State and their portal acquisitions probably in my other live stream this coming week. Thank you all for tuning in. Welcome on, and even though it's very late at night, hopefully we can get even more viewers on here like always. The dream for this show, for College Football with Sam, is to become a massive national brand without forgetting the roots of this channel, that being college football covered from a Big Ten perspective while maintaining our objectivity. So let's get started here, and I think there's no better way to start this off, this show, than talking about Penn State, because I think that all the good news that was received today with the addition of Kyron Hudson totally makes up for the loss of Beau Pribula in the transfer portal. Today, the Penn State Nittany Lions receive a commitment from former USC wide receiver Kyron Hudson on the same day that quarterback Drew Aller announces that he is back for the 2025 season. I think this more than makes up for the departure of Beau Pribula to the transfer portal, and I don't think that Beau Pribula would have left Penn State if not for, let's be honest here, the crappy winter transfer portal window, which closes well before the playoffs are even over. So what I want to talk about here, in light of Aller returning for 2025, in light and with the context of Penn State's depth chart, not just as it stands right now, but especially in the future for 2025, and with Kyron Hudson committing, I want to talk about who are the Nittany Lions potentially targeting in the transfer portal, but also who I think they should be targeting in the transfer portal. Again, I'm no coach. I am no insider. I am just a college football analyst, a knowledgeable fan of college football who is providing my insights here. And I'm going to list a lot of players who I think are good, or players who could fit with Penn State, or players who it's been known that Penn State's targeting here in this video. So the Nittany Lions are going to be active in the portal. I think it's very clear that their NIL system is strengthened, or is at least stronger than it was in previous seasons. And with Aller coming back, with a lot of young players returning that stepped up this year, like Anthony Dunco, young redshirt freshman offensive tackle who was awesome on the offensive line. You had players on defense like sophomore A.J. Harris step up and become one of the better corners in the Big Ten. And Andy Kotelnicki reformed the offense, took it from an offense that against big-name teams, against the best teams, couldn't score any points, couldn't get into the end zone or in the red zone, into a unit that, as we saw against Oregon, can be pretty lethal. And as we saw against USC in the second half, as we saw against Ohio State even in between the 20s, just couldn't punch it in the end zone. A unit on offense that I think is pretty effective, pretty efficient. And we'll actually talk about that later here in this show. But let's focus in on the portal. And first and foremost, I want to talk a little bit about Kyron Hudson, today's commit, at the time of this recording at least. Kyron Hudson had 38 receiving yards in 2024, this season. Had that awesome catch against LSU, the one-handed grab where he just, went up, grabbed the football, tucked it back down, and he had no drops this season. 462 receiving yards, he averaged 12.2 yards per reception, and he had 3 receiving touchdowns. I don't know if I would call him wide receiver 1 for Penn State, because I do like Harrison Wallace III, but I certainly think that Kyron Hudson is going to contend for being wide receiver 1. If he isn't, because Harrison Wallace III has eligibility, and I fully expect that he'll be back in 2025. I think he could use another year to further establish himself as an NFL receiver. Well, Hudson will certainly be starting with Harrison Wallace III. He is immediately a top 2 receiver in that Penn State wide receiver room that basically has Harrison Wallace III. Amari Evans has had some good games and bright moments, but ultimately Julian Fleming transferring in didn't pan out the way that Penn State wanted it to, even though he did make some plays like against USC that saved Penn State's season. So I think in getting Kyron Hudson, the Nittany Lions, James Franklin, and Andy Kotelnicki are upgrading not just their wide receiver room in terms of depth, but in terms of top-end talent. And as a whole, they're upgrading their offense too. It's another weapon for Drew Aller, a possession receiver for Drew Aller, someone who can win one-on-one battles and who can make awesome catches where you can throw it to where only he can get it. So you can put the ball out of harm's reach while knowing that Kyron Hudson can maybe go up there and make an awesome catch. It's a wonderful get for Andy Kotelnicki, for James Franklin, and for Penn State. And after some of the announcements today, with Aller coming back and Hudson transferring in, and I know that other players are going to transfer into Penn State, because I figure if they're getting a player as good as Kyron Hudson, they're going to get some other players. This is a team to watch out for in 2025. I said last season in 2023 that Penn State wasn't going to win big in 2023. They'd have to wait until 2024. We'll see if Franklin can beat a team that has more recruiting talent, or at least traditionally for this season better coaching than what James Franklin and Penn State have. We'll see what they do in the playoffs. But in 2025, I think Penn State may have expanded their window for, I think, having some fantastic seasons, not just good or great seasons, but perhaps elite seasons. I think that the Nittany Lions still need some receivers, though. I think it would be beneficial to get at least another receiver, maybe even 2 more receivers from the portal. I made this needs and wants list before Hudson committed because Hudson committed not even a few hours ago at the time of this recording again. But Penn State didn't just need one receiver to commit. I think you needed more, like 2, and maybe, just maybe 3, because Drew Aller's gone after next year. And right now he is Penn State's best quarterback in terms of NFL potential ever that Franklin has had. And he's played better than Sean Clifford in Sean Clifford's career. His entire career, Drew Aller's played better than that this season. This season, he has been more effective in some ways than some of Trace McSorley's seasons, more effective than Christian Hackenberg. I mean, you have to go far, far back. And I don't even know because I'm a young college football fan, so I don't know, how far you'd have to go to find a quarterback that has had some of the numbers, at least efficiency-wise, that Aller has put up this year. And he should be even better next year because he has good coaching and a great OC and now a better wide receiver room. I think it would be beneficial to get an additional offensive lineman, 2 defensive linemen, as Devon J. Thomas is gone. Much of that defensive tackle room is gone. I know that Abdul Carter will definitely declare for the NFL draft after this year. I definitely expect that. It's not, of course, 100% certain, but we can be pretty certain of that. And then with Jalen Reed leaving, Kevin Winston leaving, Kevin Winston Jr. and Jalen Kimber, I think picking up a corner and safety each could be a necessity if Penn State wants to contend for a national championship next season and a Big Ten championship. Some additional wants could be another offensive lineman on top of the one that I already think Penn State needs, an additional wide receiver, and also 2 additional DBs, because I do think the DB room is a little thin, could be even thinner next season. And while I think they're well coached, it's the transfer portal era, so take advantage of what you can get in the transfer portal. Some targets to talk about on the offensive side of the football, mainly wide receivers. For the Nittany Lions offensively, you have Dane Key, you have Eric Rivers, Justin Bowick, and Caleb Odom. These are players, a combination of players who I think Penn State should either go after or pursue, or ones that insider websites have reported Penn State is pursuing. Eric Rivers has 1,172 receiving yards and 62 receptions and 12 receiving touchdowns. That's someone to look at. I think he was the best wide receiver that Florida International had and one of their best conference players. Dane Key from Kentucky, 715 receiving yards and 2 receiving touchdowns. Bowick and Caleb Odom didn't do all that much at their respective schools. Odom was a former elite recruit. Bowick had 3 receiving touchdowns and almost 400 receiving yards at Ball State. Those are some names to pay attention to on offense. And then some offensive linemen in Teague Anderson, 6'5", 314 pounds, 788 snaps. He had a 81 pass blocking grade per Pro Football Focus. That's a name to pay attention to. And then there's Jordan White from Liberty. I figured Liberty's in pretty close proximity. He had a 87 run blocking grade with 781 snaps, 300 pounds. Kotelnicki loves to run the ball, and I think that picking up a great offensive lineman like Jordan White would really fit in, especially because I forget if it's Olivega Ione or JB Nelson or Sal Wormley or maybe both or maybe all 3. I think that Penn State's losing significant snaps at guard, so I think he would fit in right there. You look at some other places, mainly defense. I don't think Penn State necessarily needs. They might need a punter from the portal, but defensively, I hear that Penn State's been pursuing Bear Alexander, former elite recruit, also a Nye White, former elite recruit from Penn State. I don't know if I would go after Alexander. I know that Anai White's been at A&M his whole stop. I think he could benefit from Dion Barnes' development. He's one of the best E-line coaches in the country. I think that defensive tackle Keyshawn Silver from Kentucky, who's in the portal, could be a good get. And then in the DB room, there's Takario Davis, Devonta Smith, and Jalen Stroman. Stroman was injured this year, but great at Virginia Tech in 2023. Devonta Smith entered the portal from Alabama as a safety, and Takario Davis is one of the better cornerbacks in the entire Big 12. Entered the portal from Arizona. Had a good season in 2023 and another good season this year in 2024. So that's the state, I think, of Penn State's transfer portal targets, the ones that I've heard, and also just some ones that I'm putting out there that I think, hey, these are some really good players that Penn State can go after and really benefit from getting their commitment and getting their signature so that they can come and play for Penn State in 2025. So, talked about Penn State in the portal, and the Nittany Lions, let me tell you, they are one of the better teams in college football right now. I think that they have a serious chance to win it all. I think if they had any other coach in the playoff except for Franklin, there'd be a very good chance. I think I'd probably put their odds as second best to win it all. Their roster's insanely good. Insanely good. I mean, their offensive line depth, can't even question it. It's the same thing with the defensive line. I've been getting some flack for saying their roster might be the best in the country. It's either them or Oregon right now. Georgia's way too dinged up to put up there, and at least Penn State is alien players like Tyler Warren and Abdul Carter. Oregon is Josh Connerly Jr., maybe Tez Johnson. We all know Ohio State is Jeremiah Smith and Caleb Downs. I don't think Georgia has that type of player right now. Plus, they're dinged up. So even though they're very, very talented and deep, I think Georgia's bigger threat in the playoff is coaching. And then Texas has offensive issues. And this is a topic for another video. But still, all I'm trying to say here is that Penn State's window of opportunity I thought was going to be exclusively this year, maybe 2025. I think now with Penn State maybe coming together more on the NIL front and Aller certainly returning, the window has definitely been extended to 2025 and perhaps even beyond that. We'll have to see how Penn State does developmentally, what staff changes are made after the season. Like if someone leaves or if firings are made, we'll see how that works. And also, how recruiting works. But let's move on here, and I want to change topics a bit. We'll be talking about the portal and also just my thoughts on some of these upcoming college football playoff games interchangeably. So I want to talk about why I think Penn State wins, why they beat SMU this Saturday at noon Eastern time. So the SMU Mustangs travel to the Penn State Nittany Lions to compete for a national championship this Saturday, noon Eastern time. That is 11 a.m. Central time for the SMU Mustangs, who are out of Texas. And when I say compete for a national championship, they're not in the national championship game, but this is the first round of the college football playoff we're talking about here. And this is the first ever 12-team college football playoff. It'll be the second game ever in the first ever 12-team college football playoff. And there's a whiteout going on here. It's a noon game, yes, but there's going to be the whiteout environment at noon, and I'm very excited for this game. I know that SMU and Penn State staffers and players are also very excited for this game. And what I want to talk about here are 5 reasons why I believe the Penn State Nittany Lions will win this football game. They are currently 8.5-point favorites. I will tell you, SMU is very good in the trenches. They're a good, great team overall. They're well coached. They have underrated talent. They've been recruiting well. They have good support, good resources. If SMU wins, which is possible, they have a very realistic shot of getting to the Final Four. And at that point, that would be a major success for the Mustangs. And then whatever happens against whoever you face in the Final Four, just go out there and play your best game. And maybe you'll even reach the national championship game. As for Penn State, though, I am picking them to win. My score prediction was 34-17. And if you want to check out why I made the prediction I did, you can click the link in the top of the comment section in the pinned comment to see my Penn State versus SMU preview and prediction video, where I give a ton of information and analysis on both teams. But I want to get to the Penn State side of things and talk about why I think the Nittany Lions will win. Number 1 is that it is a whiteout environment at noon. Now, some might say the weather is a bigger factor here, but I do think SMU will be prepared. And the weather can be a factor, but I think the weather is often more of a tipping point in a game rather than this major unstoppable force that completely bullies, let's say, a better team into submission because they're playing in an unfamiliar climate. But the whiteout, the noise, the energy, the intensity, that could be something that shocks a team like SMU, who's played in a relatively easy schedule and hasn't played in an environment like this all season long. Penn State, for context, is in the college football playoff for the first time ever. This is their first season under Franklin competing for a national championship, like openly. Not we're competing for a national championship in the regular season, and if we continue to win in the regular season, we'll get to the 4-team playoff in the past or now the 12-team playoff. No, they're in the tournament. They did their job in the regular season for the first time ever to get to the college football playoff. And this fan base is desperate for a big win. They wanted it against OSU. That crowd was loud early. It was engaging, but Ohio State won. And they showed up in Indianapolis for the Big Ten championship game. And Penn State, again, they lost. The fan base showed out. It felt like somewhat of a Penn State home game in Indianapolis, but the Oregon Ducks were the better team. This fan base is desperate for a big win. And unlike some other fan bases where they don't believe in their team because of some disappointments, the Penn State fan base, I think, still believes in this football team. And I think Penn State, as a football team, believes in themselves, in part because, well, the fan base is very supportive of the team, but also because they are one of the best teams in college football. Penn State right now, I think, is a top 5 team, and another reason why I believe they will win this game, and a huge part of the reason why they're top 5 in my opinion, is their running backs, Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen. This season, they have combined for 1,660 rushing yards, 454 receiving yards, 20 total touchdowns. SMU's rushing defense is top 10 in yards per carry allowed and rushing yards per game allowed. They have not faced a stable of running backs like Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen. And even if they limit them on the ground, who's to say they're going to limit them through the air? Nicholas Singleton has phenomenal speed, acceleration, and also has good hands to catch the football. Katron Allen is a tough running back who's hard to bring down, and he also has good hands. Kotelnicki has done a very good job of getting these running backs involved in the offense as a whole. Not just running the football or the rushing side of the offense, but every aspect of the offense. And I think that Penn State's running back room and how I believe they are going to potentially wear down, I would say likely wear down, SMU's defense as the game goes on, is also somewhat of a metaphor for Penn State in comparison to SMU, where Penn State is this deeper team. They're not just a better team when it comes to talent or explosiveness or execution. They're the deeper team as well. So as the game goes on, there can be a separation of talent because SMU isn't better in many other areas, so they can't compensate for their talent disparity. And I think running backs like Singleton and Allen, they're effective. They complement each other well. Singleton's more of the home run hitter, but he has gotten some, oomph in his step, some more power. Katron Allen showed off some of his explosiveness against Oregon. I think these running backs are going to give SMU's defense a whole lot of problems. They're also going to excite the crowd. And Penn State has one of the most extreme, overpowered home field environments in all of college football. They really do. And I think that those two things are going to be a huge benefit. But reason number 3, an even bigger benefit to Penn State's goals of winning this game and continuing on their college football playoff march, is tight end Tyler Warren. Tyler Warren is one of the best players in all of college football. There's a reason he finished top 10 in Heisman voting. If the Heisman Trophy was a real award this year, in my opinion, and not a popularity contest, the finalists would be Travis Hunter, Ashton Jeanty, Tyler Warren, and probably Cam Ward. I think Gabriel has done a pretty good job this year and has had some pretty good games, but I just don't think talent-wise or individual player achievement-wise he's the same as those four. Like Tyler Warren, when you're a tight end and you have 1,062 receiving yards, 6 receiving touchdowns. You have 4 rushing touchdowns on 191 yards. You were close to leading the team in both receiving yards and rushing yards against Ohio State because the rest of your offense imploded. Singleton led that game in receiving yards, by the way. But Aller had some receptions and also had a long run that got Penn State in a position to tie it up with Ohio State in that game. And you also have a passing touchdown, and you're a good blocker. You're one of the best players in all of college football. And I think that is something to be praised in my mind. And Tyler Warren is a mismatch for linebackers, safeties, DBs. You can't cover him. You have to double cover him. And since he's not the only capable receiver in his tight end room or in the offense as a whole, well, he can be used as a decoy. And he can fool your defense and make life harder for you. So he's a huge reason, not just why Penn State I think will win this game, but why they can win the national championship, because he is someone who can put a team on his back and still perform at a high level against some of the best teams and best defenses in the country. SMU's defense is very admirable. It's a great defense, but SMU's outside the top 100 in opponent plays allowed per game. And a player like Tyler Warren, if SMU is able to get Penn State on 3rd down or 4th down, Tyler Warren is that type of player who can make plays to extend drives, keep SMU's defense on the field longer, and eventually they'll break. Or Tyler Warren's also the player who can make an explosive play happen quick and ignite the fuel, start the fire on an offense that has started off slow this year and typically takes a whole quarter to warm up. Reason number 2 is Penn State's trench play, which I think is high octane in the sense that sometimes it looks like the best in the country, but I also think it's elite. And at worst, it's one of the best offensive lines in the country paired with one of the best defensive lines in the country. Penn State this season has a 0.244 points per play margin, which means for every one play they run compared to every one play their opponent runs on average, they outscore their opponents 0.244 points per play. That's pretty impressive. And a huge part of that is because on a game-per-game basis, they outrush their opponents by nearly 100 yards. They average 2 yards more per carry than their defense gives up. And when you look at sack percentage, they do a much better job of getting to their opponent's quarterback than their opponent's quarterback does at getting to them. Penn State's defense is about an 8% sack percentage. For Penn State's offense, it's about a 3% QB sack percentage. So Abdul Carter, Denai Dennis Sutton, Zane Durant, Devon J. Thomas, Kobe King, they do a awesome job at terrorizing opponents' quarterbacks. And opponents' defensive ends, defensive tackles, linebackers, or DBs, if they send DBs on a blitz, typically don't do a good job of getting to Drew Aller and getting pressure on him. The offensive line for Penn State and the defensive line for Penn State are non-negotiables. And I don't know, and I don't think that SMU has played any unit or units plural when you look at the multiple groups and players that the trenches make up this whole season. So that's reason number 2. It's a pretty big reason why I think Penn State will win this game and why they're one of the better teams in all of college football right now. But reason number 1, and this has been something that I think has been more apparent recently, especially in the last Seoul game, which isn't a large sample size, but it was a big game. You could tell that Oregon, both in the scripted drives and the non-scripted drives, the drives that required more adaptation, you can tell that they're explosive. They have the capability of being explosive, effective. They do a very good job of getting down the field in between the 20s, and they still do a good job inside the red zone, though not as well as they do in between the 20s. I mean, Penn State is top 5 in yards per play. They average 6.7 yards per play on offense. They have a 50% success rate on offense. That's second nationally. That means 1 out of every 2 Penn State plays on a down-per-down basis gains enough yards to be considered successful. So that means on 3rd or 4th down, half of those plays, for example, just to use as an analogy, are just straight up converted because that's a successful play on third and fourth down. And for first and second down, the necessary yardage to set up what is likely going to be a successful play is gained. They do a very good job, the Nittany Lions do, and Andy Kolnicki, the offensive coordinator, at winning the down per down battle on offense. Now, they only average 3.9 red zone scores per game and 4.2 offensive touchdowns per game. And those numbers are top 20, top 25, but not top 10. Those can improve. And Penn State only averages 0.503 points per play, which I think is 15th, if not around there. They can improve there, but they're still very good in those areas. And then they're explosive, they're consistently explosive, and Penn State has had time. They've had 2 weeks to prepare for this game. Basically, a bye after the Oregon game and the Big Ten Championship game to prepare for SMU, an extra week of preparation and also rest so that the players aren't as banged up. All those things contribute to the fact that I think Penn State, yet again, is going to have an explosive game on the offensive side of the ball, and they're going to be effective. And I think there's a chance you'll see that in all of their college football playoff games because they have extra time to rest and prepare. And the longer the season has gone on, the less clunky, the less rusty, and the more polished this offense has looked on a game-per-game basis, with like the exception of Ohio State. But that's because Ohio State has the nation's best defense, and it might not be particularly close. So those are the reasons why I believe Penn State will beat SMU, could dominate SMU this coming Saturday at noon Eastern Time. The whiteout environment, running backs Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen, an explosive and effective offense. You got elite trench play. You have Drew Aller. You have a lot going for Penn State. Also, Tyler Warren, the nation's best tight end and perhaps the nation's best player. That's what Penn State has going for them. I think Penn State wins 34-17. Okay. So that's that right there. So, yeah. All right. We have 44 concurrent viewers. So I'm going to quickly take a break just to get some more water, and then I'll be right back, like 5 minutes. So, thank you. All right, we are back, everyone. Thank you for your patience. All right. Just looking at some comments here. Travis Hunter is a beast. Yes, he is. Trojan fight. Colorado dropping more games next year. Unproven QB. No more Travis Hunter. 7 games maybe. We'll have to see because Colorado has the advantage of massive talent. They have a lot more talent, star-wise, than anyone else does in college football. Sorry, a little bit tired. Not in college football. In college football, in respective to the conference they play in, the Big 12. No one in the Big 12 has more star talent than Colorado does right now. All right. Let's get back to business here, and I want to talk about Minnesota because Minnesota has been very aggressive in the transfer portal. We'll talk about Oregon, too, because Oregon's been straight up aggressive as well, but Minnesota, perhaps, I think, is a little bit of a different animal here. Just got to shake my pen to, check off some things. But Minnesota has been very, very aggressive. We got 10 transfer portal commits. So we'll be talking about that. Got Georgia Tech's backup QB. They've gotten a lot of good FCS players, both in the trenches, but also on the outside. And they're stacking up at running back. Got 3 running back commits, including former Michigan 4-star Cole Cabana. And then A.J. Turner from Marshall, who has just had phenomenal production with the Thundering Herd. And he'll be, I presume, the backup to Darius Taylor, who I think is one of the better running backs in all of college football. So let's talk about Minnesota here. The Minnesota Golden Gophers finished the 2024 season with a 7-5, 5-4 record. And things could have gone better. If they recovered the onside kick against Michigan, maybe you find 8 wins. And maybe if a few things go differently in that Penn State game, maybe you find 9 wins. And they finished off the year with a blowout win over rival Wisconsin, solidifying dominance against one of their rivals. So I think that for Minnesota, this year was actually a success. The 7-5 campaign, 5-4 record in Big Ten Conference play. You also got to remember that North Carolina game at the beginning of the year, maybe if Darius Taylor is healthy or if Kesich makes one of the field goals he missed, you're talking about a potential 10-win season. I know with a lot of close games, a lot of what-ifs, but Minnesota is a better team than I think their record says. And they're being very aggressive in the transfer portal. Immediately after their regular season is concluded, they still have to play in their bowl game against Virginia Tech, where they are a favorite. And I do think they will win that game to get to 8 wins, as PJ Fleck does very good in the postseason, takes his bowl games very seriously. And there's a lot of star talent on Minnesota's roster, but why I like this aggressive move by Minnesota is it shows that they want to do more. They want to be better. They want to compete at a higher level than they did this year, than they have in the previous few seasons, than they have ever in the 2020s. Compete for something greater like the team did in 2019. I don't think that season in the mind of PJ Fleck is meant to be a one-off. Like, oh, well, we're happy we didn't fall into 11 or 10 wins, but we're happy we got here. No, I mean, they're happy they got there, that they earned that, but that season was also a long time ago now in college football. And I think that PJ Fleck winning at Western Michigan, I think he's won at a good level at Minnesota, wants to do more, wants to be better. And you see that in this transfer portal class with 10 commits, an average commit rating of an 86.56, not a ton of star talent in terms of the average transfer portal player, but there's a lot of depth, and there is some star talent there that I want to talk about. I want to talk about what Minnesota has earned in the portal so far, the commitments they've earned, the signings that they've earned. One quarterback in Zach Pyron. Zach Pyron was the backup for much of the season to Haynes King at Georgia Tech. Haynes King is one of the better QBs in the nation when healthy. Zach Pyron is not Haynes King, but he's 6'3", 220 pounds. They used him on a lot of short runs because he's big, he has size. He had 115 rushing yards this year, 4 rushing touchdowns, averaged 3.2 yards per carry. He had a 50.2 QBR, 2 passing touchdowns, 3 interceptions, 409 passing yards, averaged 6.3 yards per pass attempt. From Alabama, big-bodied, he's mobile. Minnesota returns a fair amount of their offensive line production next year, and they have a great running back room. I think he's a good pickup. I don't know if great is what I would describe the pickup, or even if he's going to be the starting quarterback at Minnesota, but he gives them an option at quarterback with some more mobility than Brosmer gave the Gophers, and I think that with how good Minnesota is typically at running the ball, and also what they did in the portal so far at running back, and perhaps they'll do some more things in the trenches, why not add another threat to your rushing offense? They also added A.J. Turner, Marshall Thundering Herd running back, or former Marshall Thundering Herd running back A.J. Turner. 104 carries this year for 864 yards, 6 touchdowns, averaged 8.3 yards per carry. His biggest games this season were against Georgia State, where he had 3 rushing touchdowns. The first game of the year against an FCS opponent, I think Stony Brook, with a rushing touchdown and over 100 rushing yards. He averaged nearly 20 yards per carry against Virginia Tech, and he had 7 carries for 32 yards, averaged 4.6 yards per carry against Ohio State with a long of 8. So he was consistently getting some yardage against Ohio State's defense in that game. And we all know that Ohio State's rushing defense is one of the best in the country. He also had a decent game against ULM, App State, and Marshall had a lot of success this year, and A.J. Turner was a huge part of that. So I think he was a great pickup. They picked up Cole Cabana as well at running back, the Gophers did. And also Cameron Davis, who I'm a huge fan of, did well at Washington, had over 10 rushing touchdowns in 2022, was hurt in 2023, stayed with the Huskies this past year and didn't get much action because Jonah Coleman was in front of him, and Jonah Coleman's one of the better running backs in the Big Ten. So Cameron Davis and A.J. Turner and Cole Cabana are 3 additions that I like, and I think that Minnesota may have the deepest running back room perhaps in the Big Ten and nationally next year. It may even have the best. We'll have to wait and see, and of course Ohio State could land someone in the portal or return Quinshon Judkins as well. Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen might be back for Penn State soon, and Michigan may make some moves. You also got to remember about Oregon and how good they are at running back, developing and recruiting both in the portal and in high school. But I like those pickups. Minnesota got a tight end in Drew Bieber from Purdue out of the portal. Javon Tracy from Miami of Ohio, where he had over 500 receiving yards and did well with the Redhawks, Miami of Ohio, in the MAC. They contended for the MAC championship this year. Minnesota got 2 defensive linemen, Stephen Curtis from Illinois State, and also Rashawn Lawrence. And then they had a cornerback commit and also a kicker. So whether it's special teams, Brady Denneberg was the kicker who committed, cornerback Jalen Bowden, or whether it's all the other players I told you about, 10 incoming transfers. The cycle's not even close to being finished, the winter transfer portal cycle. I expect Minnesota to land more commits because I think they could use some more commits. I think 1 to 2 offensive linemen could be beneficial for Minnesota to acquire in the portal. Another defensive lineman, because they do lose a lot of depth and some starters there, particularly at D-end. Another wide receiver, I think, could be helpful. And perhaps another quarterback, if Minnesota can find one. I think that would put a very nice finishing touch on what has been an aggressive, forward-thinking, and underrated transfer portal class by the Minnesota Golden Gophers. I do think that they're going to have success in 2025, not just because of what they return, not just because I think the schedule sets up potentially nicely for them, but also because of this portal class. I think these moves set up 2025 as a year for PJ Fleck that could be another breakthrough year, or that could be at least a year of high expectations where they go in and they're talking about, competing at a high level for the Big Ten, and maybe even being one of those teams who's looking from the inside, but still close enough to where they can say they're competing for a college football playoff spot. They open up against Buffalo, Northwestern State. They play at California in the non-conference, which could be a good gauge for how they'll do in some of their more mediocre, average, above average Big Ten conference games. They get a bye September 20th, host Rutgers the 27th, play at Ohio State October 4th, host Purdue October 11th, host Nebraska October 18th, play at rival Iowa October 25th, host Michigan State November 1st. They get a bye November 8th, play at Oregon November 15th, play at Northwestern November 22nd, and they host Wisconsin November 29th. Oregon and OSU on the road are going to be tough, but I'll tell you, all those other games are winnable. That's 10 games. Doesn't mean they'll win 10. In fact, that's probably unlikely. But 8 wins, 9 wins, definitely very possible, if not favored in the expectation, because Minnesota won 7 games this past season. And I'd say 10 is possible with this schedule. So more depth, more talent, and you are able to practice with them and coach them in spring ball, which is very valuable. So I think this is a fantastic move, series of moves by PJ Fleck and his staff in the winter transfer portal cycle. So that's Minnesota. And the fact that the Gophers are doing this, I think, is impressive. It's admirable. You love to see it. You know, the top 10 portal classes right now, Mississippi State, Wisconsin, Louisville, Texas A&M, Minnesota, Houston, Auburn, Texas Tech, Ole Miss, and LSU. Out of all those programs, the one with the least amount of resources might actually be Minnesota at 6. If you take out Houston, who's in the Big 12, and Louisville's in the ACC, I would say Mississippi State may have more resources than Minnesota. Don't know that for sure. But you just like seeing a school like Minnesota in the top 10 here. And I don't think it necessarily reeks of desperation, because you bring back Darius Taylor. You bring back your interior offensive line. You bring back a lot of players on defense. So a defensive unit that was good this year. I just think that maybe PJ Fleck is seeing something that he didn't see previously, or he believes that maybe Minnesota's going to have to be a heavy player in the transfer portal if they want to level up. So that's that on Minnesota. Next, we're going to talk about Oregon here. Oregon football, I think, could reload in 2025 based off of this class that I'm seeing. The Oregon Ducks. Oh, wait. Just making sure that. What's going on? I'm hearing a noise for whatever reason, but I'm just going to try to ignore it. Okay. The Oregon Ducks are being aggressive in the transfer portal yet again. They added Theron Johnson and Dylan Thieneman in the past few days, and those two additions by themselves have convinced me that Oregon may reload in 2025. They may just lock and reload, lock and load, and not take a step back, even though Dylan Gabriel is a senior, probably departing for the NFL, doesn't have any more eligibility left. Jordan James could declare for the NFL. Tez Johnson has been a good receiver, a phenomenal receiver this year, definitely has an NFL future. Johnny Cornelius is out of eligibility. Josh Connerly Jr. could declare early for the NFL and be in a good position to be one of the best offensive tackles taken. And Derek Harmon, Jamari Caldwell, it's the same thing on the defensive tackle front. And much of Oregon's secondary, they're seniors. Jeffrey Bosson, Bryce Betcher are seniors. But Oregon, they got Dylan Thieneman, one of the best, if not the best, safeties available in the portal. Theron Johnson is a very underrated cornerback. They're going to land more of the top players in the portal. I'm telling you that. This is just the beginning right here. These moves are for Dan Lanning, for Tosh Lupoy, and for Will Stein and this staff. You look at the commitments they received recently, Thieneman and Johnson, they combined in 2024 for 157 total tackles, 1 sack, 16 passes defended, and 2 interceptions. And they didn't play on teams that had a lot of great players overall. Northwestern had several high-performing players on defense, some on the offensive line. Purdue had a good set of tight ends, and they had a good defensive end, some good linebackers, and a good safety in Dylan Thieneman, but not much else. Those 2 teams combined for a record of 6-18. 6-18. Those are the combined records for Purdue and Northwestern this season. They could have gone anywhere, I think, a lot of those players. I mean, Dylan Thieneman was being pursued by Ohio State and Oregon. Well, Oregon got him, and they got Theron Johnson as well. And for a secondary that has a lot of veteran players who are going to need to be replaced in 2025, this is a great start. Dan Lanning is a coach who I think right now is top 5. I think moves like this solidify the fact that he is one of the best coaches in the country. Recruits at a high level, in the portal and in high school, develops at an even higher level, schemes at a high level. I mean, there's a reason Oregon right now is the only undefeated team in the country. They're 13-0. They have the number 1 seed. I think they're the best team in the nation by a fair mile. And there's not much more to that than that. Oregon is heading in an elite direction. They could be the next dynasty in college football. They're perfectly positioned with their resources. They have elite coaching. They're starting off hot in a new conference, in one of the better conferences in college football. Perhaps this year at the top at least, because I think the SEC is the deepest conference in football, but maybe at the top it's the Big Ten who's the best this season, who has the most national championship caliber teams. We'll have to see how the playoff pans out. And I predicted Oregon to win it all in 2024, this season. And by predicted, I don't mean in the preseason, because I didn't do that, sadly. But after the win against Ohio State, and as the season went on, it became very apparent to me, in my mind, that Oregon was going to be the national championship. So I've picked them. We'll have to see how that ages, if they win it all or if they don't. That's outside of my control. And that's inside of Dan Lanning's control to a large degree. But even more, what's inside of his control is how does he want his program to operate and to function over a series of games, over a series of seasons, not just in one game or even in one season. And the long-term view, I think, for Oregon is one that should be filled with optimism, that should be positive, that if you're an Oregon fan, your eyes should pop. This is incredible. And I know it's just 2 commits, but this is just the start. Oregon will probably finish with a top 10 transfer portal class because they'll need to. And by top 10, I don't just mean in terms of quantity, because Oregon probably won't finish top 10 there because they recruit and develop so well, but in quality overall. You'll see how many 4-star transfers they get, some 5 stars maybe even, and they'll have a good year. They already had a great year, finishing number 1 in the Big Ten, probably finishing. High school recruiting technically isn't over, but it's very close to being over after early National Signing Day. They've come close to finishing with the best recruiting class in the Big Ten, the best in terms of average recruit rating in the nation, and their portal class is already off to a hot start. So I think Thieneman and Johnson next year will be some of the better defensive backs in the Big Ten, and that will be huge after all the losses Oregon is going to sustain in the secondary. And as I've already said throughout this video, this is just the beginning. There will be more players Oregon gets from the portal. On defense, on offense, special teams, if need be. This is just the beginning. Oregon football is one of the best programs in the entire country right now. They are the best team in college football. And they have a head coach who is going to do everything it takes within ethical bounds to win it all. And to win it all not just once, but more than that. I mean, he's been coached by Kirby Smart and Nick Saban, for crying out loud. So I think Oregon is on a right path here. As for who they should get or who they shouldn't get, it's not as easy to say as it is for almost any other Big Ten program, because I think Oregon has recruited at an elite level on the O-line, which is very important. They're recruiting at an elite level at wide receiver and cornerback. See this past class. They have Dante Moore at quarterback. That's probably one of the more important areas to pay attention for Oregon is what happens with Dante Moore. Do they trust him to be the starter, or do they bring in someone new from the portal and try and start him, or at least give Moore some competition? And whether Moore leaves or not, tight end with Kenyon Sadiq, pretty stacked there. On the defensive line and linebacker, those are some areas that I think could receive some incoming portal help, but it's not as simple as Ohio State, because Ohio State loses the majority of their starters, and they have some areas like the O-line where they have recruited terribly for their level. Michigan's coming off of a 7-5 season, and they have not developed well at wide receiver, and they're young on the O-line, and I think had a bad year developmentally there as well. Similar with safety and corner. So it's obvious that Michigan needs certain guys from the portal, and probably a lot of them. For Penn State, it's obvious they have a need at wide receiver, and probably on the defensive line with how much they're losing there. With Oregon, it's not as obvious because they've set themselves up for success in almost every possible way, and they're only getting better in recruiting and development. Year one, fantastic for year one under Lanning at Oregon. Year two, I would say the same thing. 2 losses to Washington left a little bit of a bad taste in their mouth, but they won 10 games. And year three, well, they're 13-0. They keep winning more games every year Lanning is there. Obviously, progress is not linear, but just the fact that it has been for the first 3 years record-wise, even moving to a new conference, is insane. So, all that being said, Oregon is pointing itself in an elite direction. They have one of the best recruiting classes and are going to have one of the best transfer portal classes coming in for 2025. And with their schedule, I wouldn't be shocked if Oregon wins the Big Ten next season and potentially wins it all next season. So that's the Oregon Ducks. And if you're a fan of a Big Ten school who's not Oregon, this is going to be life in the Big Ten now. It's not just Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State that you have to pay attention to. You have to pay attention to Oregon. So, oh man, got to drink some water here. The noise I listened to was my dog whining. I have no clue why he was whining. Very annoying. But I have 4 more topics to go over. We've been on here for about an hour. It's nice to see that we still have a lot of concurrent viewers. After this, I'm telling you guys, to be honest, I'm going to go to bed, and I'm going to wake up early, might even sacrifice an hour or 2 of sleep so that I can get all these videos scheduled out for tomorrow, because we're packed this week with content. And of course, we'll be going live Friday and Saturday, for the first round college football playoff games. Okay, let me read some comments here. Alex Wells, Sko Ducks. Sko Ducks, indeed. The mighty Jew, Oregon versus Penn State in the final. I will be revealing my college football playoff bracket Wednesday night, which is most likely when I'll be going live. To be announced, to be determined, of course, but that's unofficially when it's going to be. I'll be announcing my playoff bracket, then I will tell you guys in a sneak peek right here. It will be either Oregon versus Penn State in the final or Oregon versus Georgia in the final. I truly believe those 3 teams have the best shot at winning it all. Roster-wise, Oregon and Penn State. Coaching-wise, Oregon and Georgia. That's kind of how I view the national championship. If all the coaching staffs were equal, I'd pick Oregon or Penn State to win it all. If all of the rosters were equal, I would pick Georgia to win it all. But Oregon is kind of like the perfect mix, because Oregon could have the nation's best roster and also the nation's best coaching staff. I think that right now Kirby Smart's the nation's best head coach, and I'd slightly, well, it's a push. It's a wash. Penn State, Oregon tied in my mind for the best roster in the country. Might lean Penn State, but the more I think about it, I would prefer to retract that statement of mine and say it's a push. Like, Penn State could have the nation's number 1 roster. I think it's top 2, but Oregon's just so good that I think it's unfair to just push them aside. I mean, I watch that team and I think to myself, that's impressive. I mean, that is a team you want to succeed because they're so well coached, because they develop well. I like to root for success as long as it isn't annoying and overly repetitive. Why not root for Oregon? I mean, Oregon's fun, very fun, and objectively, I think they're the best team in college football. Okay, let's move on though, and had to burp there. That's why I muted myself. Let's talk about Indiana at Notre Dame and why I think the Indiana Hoosiers are going to beat the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, because I predicted that. I received some pushback and also some praise for it. I was mocked for about a week for picking Indiana to beat Ohio State, which was a bad prediction and failed miserably. And then when Michigan beat Ohio State, the mocking stopped, because basically every reason I gave for Indiana beating OSU outside of IU's receivers came to life in the Michigan game. As I said, that Ohio State-Michigan game was the culmination of everything Ohio State was getting away with for the past month catching up to them. All the weaknesses, all the errors that were being masked by certain things and that people were ignoring just came up like a trebuchet right in the face of that program. And we'll talk about Ohio State later in the show and why I think they'll beat Tennessee. I think they'll respond to that Michigan game a bit, but that's for later in the show. So, let's talk about why Indiana will beat Notre Dame. The Indiana Hoosiers travel to the Notre Dame Fighting Irish this Friday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. This game right here is the first ever 12-team college football playoff game, the first ever first-round college football playoff game. We haven't had a college football playoff game designated as a first-round game yet. You've heard of the college football playoff semifinal game in the 4-team college football playoff. We have that. But now on top of that in the national championship games, we have quarterfinal games, and we have first-round games. Well, this is the first ever first-round college football playoff game between the Indiana Hoosiers and the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, who are both 11-1. Notre Dame is favored by 7.5 points, and I want to talk to you in this video about why I think Indiana wins. I picked Indiana to win by a score of 37-31. It was a weird score prediction because I think weird things are going to happen in South Bend and this game. I think it's going to be an entertaining matchup. It would not surprise me if Notre Dame wins this game. I understand why they are 7.5 point favorites here, why a lot of people are picking them to win and perhaps even win big. But I think Indiana has a lot of things going for them and several things up their sleeve that in a game like this against a Notre Dame team who's very dominant but also has some imperfections and I think is one-dimensional in some areas, Indiana can come out on top. So let's get down to business and talk about this. Just want to give a quick plug, though, and say if you have not watched my Indiana versus Notre Dame preview and prediction video, where I talk about things from both sides, go over analytics, statistics, styles of gameplay, and matchups for both teams, make sure to click the link down below in the top of the pinned comment to watch that preview and prediction video if you haven't already, because we're going to be taking things from the Indiana side of things, and I just want to ensure that to you guys that we're objective here on College Football with Sam. This is just me further backing up my claim that Indiana is going to win this football game. In fact, there will be 5 reasons why Notre Dame will win this game, because I think it's very winnable for Notre Dame. So hit the notification bell and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already so that you can get notified when that 5 reasons why Notre Dame wins video is released. But we're going to be talking about 5 reasons why I think Indiana will win. And reason number 5 here, we saved the best for last, is superior coaching. Just straight up. It's 11-1 for both teams. Blind resume test. 11-1. One team loses at home to Northern Illinois. The other team loses on the road to Ohio State. The team that lost to Ohio State has a blue chip ratio of under 20%. Less than 1 out of every 5 of their players was a 4-star out of high school. The majority of Indiana's players, well, you don't know it's Indiana because it's a blind resume test, but the majority of the players of the team who lost to Ohio State didn't even receive an Ohio State offer, weren't even considered for that. The team who lost to Northern Illinois did not play and never played all season long a team close to the caliber of Ohio State, and yet a lot of their players received Ohio State offers. They have a blue chip ratio of well above 50%, yet they lost to Northern Illinois. And they played competitively with Louisville, struggled for times on one side of the ball against Miami, Ohio, and it was a tight one against Texas A&M early in the year when A&M was not top 25. You may say that opinion is biased of mine, and I get that Indiana has not played very, very much of a tough schedule. I get that. That's why this is reason number 5 and not reason number 1, because there is not as much evidence to back this up as some of the other points. Also because while this is very important, coaching is just one side of the coin here. There's stuff on Indiana's roster that I think may be more important in this game. If you have really good coaching and yet you don't have a good rushing defense, well, Notre Dame just will run all over you and it won't matter. You'll lose. So we'll get to that later. But Indiana is the only team in the 12-team college football playoff outside of like maybe Boise State and Arizona State to have a blue chip ratio this low. And they're 11-1. They are top 5 in multiple scoring offense and defensive categories. They are top 10 in most power ratings. They're top 8, top 6 in my power ratings, close to top 5. And they're objectively a top 10 team. Cignetti this season has been an elite coach, and he has won everywhere else he's been. James Madison, Elon, was a winner in terms of recruiting and development at Alabama, where he learned under Nick Saban. So I look here at Indiana, and I think that they are one of the better teams in the country when it comes to coaching and fundamental soundness. What they lack in talent, they often make up for in coaching and in discipline. Part of the reason why Ohio State blew them out is they were not disciplined, and they did not make the same adjustments that I expected a staff like theirs to make. And they had a lot of mistakes. Some muffed punts, some punts that went to the wrong side of the field, couldn't adjust to Jim Knowles' pass rush, for example. And some of that's because Ohio State's that good. Make no mistake about it. So there's a chance that Notre Dame abuses Indiana in those ways. But I think Indiana's better coached than Notre Dame because they're performing at a level that Notre Dame is performing at. They have a better loss, and they have far less talent in terms of recruiting. I think they're better coached. So that's reason number 5, why they'll win. And coaching, when you have the amount of rest that both of these teams have had, they've basically had 2 bye weeks in a row, didn't play in conference championship games because Notre Dame's independent, and Indiana didn't finish high enough in the standings. Coaching matters even more when it comes to game planning and having that long of a time to plan and also rest. Number 4 is team physicality. Notre Dame's one of the most physical teams in the country. I love their strength and conditioning program. Their D-line is near elite, maybe great at the worst. Their O-line is near elite at the worst. One of the best, perhaps the best O-line in the nation at best. They just simply destroy most teams they play because they're more physical than they are, and they're deeper. And on top of that, make no mistake about it, Notre Dame is not badly coached. They have an elite OC in Mike Denbrock. They have an elite offensive mind in Marcus Freeman, a good DC in Al Golden, and a coach in Marcus Freeman, who I think is getting better and better every year, the more that his tenure increases at Notre Dame as a head coach. It's his first ever head coaching job. He's doing better and better every year in terms of on-the-field results, and he's leveled up Notre Dame in the recruiting process, in the world of recruiting, and has even used the portal. But back to point number 4. Indiana's a physical football team. They're the most fundamentally sound team in the country. I already touched on this, and they're as tough as nails. They don't give up. They find ways to win. They find ways to exploit your weaknesses. Their rushing offense is not top 10, not even top 25 in a lot of areas, but you watch the film, their backs are able to consistently fall forward for yards. They have good vision. Their offensive line is tough, well-sized. It's the same thing with their defensive line. They rarely have busted coverages, and they cover and tackle very well, read plays, and offense as well in the secondary. on defense. Their offense is very tactical. They're effective on fourth down, both on offense and defense. This team is not just well coached and well developed and well deep in almost an underrated way, but they're very, very physical. I mean, they went toe-to-toe with Ohio State in the trenches, losing on their O-line versus Ohio State's D-line, but I would say that they were beating up on Ohio State's O-line for much of that game, especially when it came to run defense. Pass defense, Ohio State may have won the battle there, but Ohio State could not run the ball until garbage time when they broke off one long run. Instead of that, they did not run on Indiana at all. They don't have the O-line that Notre Dame does, though, so this is going to be a big test for IU. But Indiana is a physical team. They're going to bring their A game here, and they're going to play hard, and they're going to last longer, I think, than some people believe. Reason number 3 is their wide receiver room is very explosive. Indiana's is. They have 5 receivers with 300 or more receiving yards and 4 with 4 or more touchdowns. In total, Indiana's 5 best receivers have 2,597 receiving yards. They average 15.4 yards per reception and 25 receiving touchdowns. Notre Dame does not even allow their opponents to complete half of their passing attempts. Their opponent average completion percentage is like 48%, which is first nationally. And they have a player like Xavier Watts at safety who's just absolutely phenomenal. And even though Benjamin Morrison is hurt, their corner room is still one of the best in the country. Not many teams that Notre Dame has played have had very functional passing offenses outside of USC in Louisville, who had some success against them. Indiana is better than both of those teams at passing the ball. This is the best passing offense and deepest set of receivers and best quarterback. We'll get to the quarterback in a minute, that Notre Dame has played all season long. They're deep. They could go 5 wide on Notre Dame and probably will at points in this game. They're deep at receiver. They have a diversified set of bodies. Elijah Surratt is the reliable receiver. Omar Cooper Jr. is their explosive receiver. And they do a good job typically of catching the football, of running their routes, of blocking. It's a receiver core that many in America, including some college football playoff teams, I think would trade in exchange for their own, because especially they are reliable. Reason number 2 is Curtis Rourke, who's a veteran, and he has been elite this year analytically. 202 out of 287 for completions and attempts, 2,827 passing yards, 27 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, averages 9.9 yards per attempt, and has an 85.7 QBR. Curtis Rourke is not just an effective passer, but he can run. Curtis Rourke has negative rushing yards this year and 2 rushing touchdowns. But at Ohio, his prior school, he ran an option offense. And we saw later in the game in garbage time against Ohio State where he used his legs. And we saw earlier in the year where he used his legs occasionally here and there. It wouldn't shock me that in a game like this, where in 2021, 2022, and 2023, he had over 200 rushing yards and anywhere from 3 to 4 rushing touchdowns in those seasons on average. It wouldn't shock me at all if maybe Indiana decides to run him a little bit, run him with the zone read or maybe some quarterback designed runs. I mean, he is a tall, big guy at 6'5", 223 pounds right there, and he has some mobility. So it's just something to pay attention to on the ground, as Indiana has an effective ground game, but it's not a world-beater ground attack. It's more of a power rushing attack to keep opposing defenses honest and to convert on 3rd and short or maybe a 4th and short, where Indiana's actually had some disappointments this year on 4th and short running the football. That's just something to keep in mind. But when it comes to passing the ball, he has a 181.4 passer rating, 27 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. That is a greater than 6-to-1 touchdown interception ratio. He gets one more passing touchdown, that's a 7-to-1 TD-INT ratio. He does not turn over the football through the air. He doesn't. He's one of the nation's best QBs. And the Ohio State game is more on his offensive line than him. They literally could not block the extra guy. Every time Jim Knowles would send 6 men, The sixth man always got through. Couldn't block him. They couldn't figure it out. And as a result, he just doesn't have anywhere to go. I mean, he's not Lamar Jackson. He doesn't have insane speed with his legs. So a huge point of this game, and I didn't bring it up as a reason why Indiana will win because I don't know how well they'll do of a job of protecting Curtis Rourke. The offensive line determines a huge part of this game. I think it'll be all right. Notre Dame does have a good defense, so I do expect them to get some pressure. But reason number one why I'm picking Indiana to win this game is I think even if Curtis Rourke and the offense do get limited, Indiana's defense is going to have, I think, a fun time in this game. Now, by fun, I don't mean they're going to completely shut down Jeremiah Love. I don't think that's possible. But they'll limit Notre Dame, and I think they'll force Notre Dame to pass more than they want to pass. Indiana on defense only allows 0.252 points per play, only 4.1 opponent yards per play. They earn 2.5 sacks per game and 7.2 tackles for loss per game. And they only allow 76.2 rushing yards per game and 2.6 opponent yards per carry. This defensive front, with players like C.J. West, Tyreek Tucker, Michael Kamara, Aiden Fisher, it's one of the better fronts in the entire nation. Indiana has one of the nation's best defensive lines. No, it's not might. It's a definite. This is the best defensive front and best defense overall that Notre Dame has played all season. And I think they'll be able to test that offensive line and running back room from Notre Dame a little bit. It won't be a complete shutdown. I think that Jeremiah Love will get one long run or maybe two. But overall, it's going to be much harder to run on this Indiana defense than any other defense Notre Dame has played all season. So even if Indiana's offense is very limited in this game, is very handicapped by their own weaknesses and Notre Dame's adjustments, which I don't think is a given. I think Indiana will score some points here on offense. There is a good chance that Indiana, it's a chance I'm not even predicting because I think it'll be a high-scoring game that Indiana will win. The point I'm trying to make is Indiana can win this game and it can be a low-scoring affair. They can win in a shootout. They can win in a normal game. They can win in a low-scoring game because of how they match up against a Notre Dame team that's elite at stopping the pass, that is elite at running the ball, but in run defense has some areas that are suspect, and in the passing offense, completely they rely on the threat of their rushing game. If Indiana can shut down, and not really shut down, but more so limit the rushing attack early, Riley Leonard and his receivers and Mitchell Evans will have a much harder time getting any production through the air on also one of the better secondaries in college football, specifically like D'Angelo Pons, for example, one of the Big Ten's better corners. So that is why I believe Indiana will win this game. They have superior coaching. They are one of the most physical teams in college football, and they are as tough as nails. They have a deep wide receiver room that can spread out this Notre Dame defense and not burn them because Notre Dame's defense, specifically passing defense, is good, but keep them honest and maybe find some holes if there are any, and I do think there are based off of that USC game in this Notre Dame secondary. Curtis Rourke will place the football accurately and maybe use his legs in a critical game for Indiana's future. A playoff win for the Hoosiers would be huge. I think we can all agree on that. And of course, the defensive line and the linebacker core, which I think is going to keep Jeremiah Love, Jadarian Price, Pat Coogan and that offensive line, and even Riley Leonard, who almost is 1,000 yards rushing with his legs, in check. They won't shut them down, but I think they'll keep them in check. That's why I'm thinking Indiana wins this game. My prediction is 37-31 Hoosiers. It wouldn't shock me, though, if Indiana, let's say, won this game 16-13 Hoosiers, or 17-13 Hoosiers, or 20-13, or 27-20 Hoosiers. I just think Indiana wins this game. I think it's going to be close, and I think weird things are going to happen in South Bend. What a game. This is honestly, outside of Ohio State, Tennessee, the game I'm the most excited for. And that is that. Now, we only have one more game to talk about. That is Ohio State, Tennessee, and why I think Ohio State wins. And then we have, well, Ohio State and Michigan and the transfer portal. Still 29 concurrent viewers. You guys are awesome. We got 400 total viewers. I'm very excited by these numbers. Very excited. Just a little bit of a sip of water right there. And we'll finish in 2 hours, which is kind of where I wanted to finish here. So that's pretty incredible. All right, let's talk about Michigan in the portal. So in other news, the Michigan Wolverines received 3 commits from the portal today in 1 hour, on top of earlier in the week receiving a commitment from backup Indiana wide receiver Donovan McCulley. So the Michigan Wolverines have 4 incoming transfers so far in their 2025 transfer portal class. And what I want to talk about today is the commitments that Michigan received this Monday, December 16th, at the time of this recording. And I also want to talk about who are the Wolverines still pursuing and who should they pursue, because after a 7-5 year with a 5-4 record in Big Ten Conference play, I know Michigan beat Michigan State and they beat Ohio State, their 2 rivals, and they had a winning regular season and a winning season in Big Ten play. But the season was not a success. It was not. There were successful aspects of the season, getting Bryce Young, motivating the boosters, beating your 2 biggest rivals. But 5 losses, including blowout, humiliating losses to Oregon, Illinois, Texas, close losses to Washington, and a loss to Indiana that could have been another ugly loss. That's not a success, especially with all the first-round talent Michigan had this year, and that they are losing for the most part entering 2025. So Michigan has a lot of work to do in the transfer portal, but they're being active, they're being aggressive, they are pursuing a lot of different players who are competing at a high level and succeeding, or succeeding and competing at lower levels who the staff trusts and think that they can, groom them to be better players in the Big Ten and contributors to a Michigan team that has high expectations year in, year out. And now with Bryce Underwood at quarterback, I think that Michigan, with a schedule of opportunity next year, is looking to be back in the college football playoff and Big Ten championship conversation. So let's talk about today's commits. Michigan had several. They first and foremost had the Metcalf brothers from Arkansas, and they combined, both of them are defensive backs, by the way. They combined for 57 tackles, 7 passes defended, 3 interceptions, and a forced fumble. And then you have Brady Norton, who has a 73.5 offensive grade from Pro Football Focus, offensive tackle from Cal Poly. He had a lot of snaps this year, one of the better offensive tackles in the FCS. Just great prospect. And I think that with Michigan's offensive line, the situation with Evan Link, where for much of the year he struggled mightily in pass block, got better as the year went on, but with Miles Hinton declaring for the NFL draft, I think it was necessary to bring in an offensive tackle for Michigan. I'm glad the staff, Grant Newsome, new offensive coordinator Chip Lindsey, and Sharon Moore realized that need. And bring in Tevis Metcalf and TJ Metcalf, depth in the safety room. I forget which one's the younger one, but one of them's very young, like a freshman this year. The other's more experienced, so you get some young talent that you can develop, and another talent who is a proven player in the SEC. And these things should excite Michigan fans. Oregon, I was just talking about earlier in the show. Oregon's being aggressive. They're making big moves in the portal. And Minnesota is in their own way, too. Not getting the same caliber of players, but getting 10 players this early and getting them to go to Minnesota, nonetheless, is quite remarkable. And I think Michigan is closer to Oregon than Minnesota because they have a lot of resources. I mean, they can get some top guys in the portal, and they have a lot of money backing them. They're a blue blood. They're only 1 year removed from a national championship, 1 year removed from winning the Big Ten for 3 years in a row. They've beat Ohio State for 4 years in a row, who I think many, even with Oregon's success and even with Michigan's success, still view Ohio State as the program in the Big Ten right now. So today's commits, I think, are an epitome of the fact that there's excitement around Michigan football. They're being aggressive in the portal. They're pursuing guys in the portal. And Michigan's also keeping a lot of information close to their chest because these commitments just happened, thrice in an hour. And there was not much buzz or news surrounding Michigan operating in the portal. The Metcalf brothers visited Michigan. Brady Norton was offered by Michigan, but that was about it. Not much else news was provided. And yet, here we are. And Michigan received 3 commitments in a day on top of Donovan McCulley, who was not active for much of this year for Indiana. But in 2023, he had a good season. He had an okay year in 2022. I just think that Curt Cignetti's guys at receiver are dudes, are some of the better receivers in the Big Ten. And I don't think Donovan McCulley is that. He maybe could be developed into that. I think he's a good receiver, an above-average receiver. But is he a dude? Is he an all Big Ten? Certainly not All-American, but all Big Ten caliber receiver. I don't think so. I really especially loved bringing in Brady Norton. Really loved that. He's not yet 300 pounds, but he's tall, and I think the staff will get him up to 300 pounds, and it was very effective at Cal Poly. Let's look at some more transfer portal needs, though, for Michigan. I think Michigan needs a quarterback, for starters. I think that Bryce Underwood has to compete with someone for the job, and you need someone to mentor him, someone to develop him, and I'd say preferably a mobile quarterback, because Underwood does have some mobility. And I think with Chip Lindsey commanding the offense now as the offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach, you are going to see Underwood run the football, or whoever Michigan brings in at quarterback. If they do, and if they beat out Underwood, they'll run him at quarterback. I think that losing Khalil Mullings and Donovan Edwards both is a blow to the running back room, so I think Michigan needs at least one running back. I thought about 2, but I know Michigan's recruited all right there. I know that people are excited about Benjamin Hall. 2, I don't think 2 is necessary, but I think it would be good. But certainly 1. Michigan needs at least 1 running back from the portal. Amarian Hampton declared for the draft, so Michigan is not going to be getting him. Just used him as a UNC connection. Was there for the same amount of time, if not longer, actually, than Chip Lindsey was. Michigan, I think, needs 3 wide receivers, a tight end, although the tight end, well, I don't think is an emergency need. I think it's a need because, Marlon Klein and the rest of Michigan's tight end room do not have the same type of experience or upside that Colston Loveland does. Michigan also needs a guard. They need a tackle, and they got a tackle. I made this list before the commitments, but they could use, I think, another offensive lineman. And I think also Michigan needs a defensive tackle, a corner, and a safety. Additionally, Michigan could go after a 4th wide receiver, a 3rd offensive lineman, a 2nd defensive lineman, and I think a 3rd defensive back. Michigan, they're losing a lot of talent after 2024, and a lot of their talent that is coming back or that played significant time in 2024, there are questions surrounding. I mean, look at the quarterback room, for example. If Michigan returned all of their quarterbacks, we'd still be talking about getting a transfer QB, including Underwood coming in, because Davis Warren, Alex Orji, Jaden Denegal, all of them are worse than Bryce Underwood. It's the same thing with Jaden Davis. And then you look at running back behind Khalil Mullings and Edwards, who's really proven. There isn't a proven player. Now, I think Benjamin Hall will do rather well, but I'm not a member of the staff. I'm not an insider. I'm just speaking my mind. I'm a knowledgeable college football fan and a college football analyst. I'm not a coach here. Michigan's wide receiver room, even though they did have some good recruits from high school, none of them have really panned out. So I think there's some fresh blood needed there. And in the secondary, well, Michigan's performed rather poorly there, and they don't have a lot of depth. They lost a lot of depth, whether it's injury or to the portal, in the preseason. So I think Michigan needs DBs. I think they need perimeter players, and they need players really everywhere. It's very helpful that Michigan's bringing back Dominic Zvada, though. I think the best kicker, or one of the best kickers in the country, for sure. Let's look at the offense here, and then we can check out the defense. Offensively, Michigan, I think, should target Caden Salter. I'm just going to say it. Pause there because he's regressed from 2023 to 2024. Had only 1,886 passing yards this year, 15 touchdowns, 6 picks, 7.2 yards per pass attempt, and he had 587 rushing yards for 7 touchdowns and averaged 5.1 yards per carry. Not a good year for a quarterback. But in 2023, he was much better, and he's a mobile QB, and he's a veteran QB, and he's played in a system at Liberty where they like to run the football more than they pass the football. I think at a basic, broad level, he fits a lot of what Michigan wants in a quarterback. And I think bringing him in to mentor Bryce Underwood or start this year if Underwood isn't ready, or maybe be a part of a 2 QB system would be smart here. I don't think that he's the biggest priority because I don't know who Michigan is going to target at quarterback. They wanted Billy Edwards Jr., but he decided to go to Wisconsin because I think at Wisconsin he's probably going to start there. And at Michigan, there are no guarantees to start. Michigan is going to need to either pay a quarterback who wants to start a lot of money to sacrifice his starting gig. They're going to have to get a quarterback with more eligibility remaining so that if he doesn't start, he can transfer somewhere after that season. Or they're going to have to get someone who's willing or maybe even wants to be a backup at quarterback. So that's why I don't have anyone listed in this video, but I shouted out Caden Salter because I've liked him for a while now, and I would love to see him in a Michigan uniform, and I think he's a good QB. At running back, you have Quentin Joyner, who had 478 rushing yards, 3 rushing touchdowns, averaged 7.6 yards per carry, and also Alabama running back Justice Haynes, who was recruited by Tony Alford, went to Alabama. Alford's now at Michigan, but Ohio State's another team to look out for him. 448 yards, 7 touchdowns, 5.7 yards per carry. I look at Max Clare at tight end, who had 685 yards on 51 receptions and 4 receiving touchdowns at Purdue. He could be a tight end that wherever he goes could have 1,000 receiving yards next season. He's a really good tight end, just played in a system that was rather poor. At wide receiver, I have Dane Key, I have Eric Rivers, Omega Blake, and Kobe Paysour. Kobe Paysour is from North Carolina, 19 receptions for 330 yards. Omega Blake is from Charlotte, got the Biff Poggi connection, 32 receptions, 795 yards, 9 touchdowns. Eric Rivers, 1,172 receiving yards, 12 receiving touchdowns, would come from Florida International. And then Dane Key from Kentucky, another area where he may not transfer if the situation there wasn't so bad. 715 receiving yards, 2 receiving touchdowns on 47 receptions. Those are some people that I think Michigan is either looking at and offering, courting right now, or who they should be offering and courting. On the offensive line, Isaiah World, Falali Famoe, Jordan White, and Josh Thompson are some other players to look at. World and Famoe are offensive tackles. White and Thompson are guards. All of them have had over 600 snaps. You look at all of them as well. They have, except for Famoe, have at least a mid-60s grade or higher from Pro Football Focus, and also 600 snaps or more. And Famoe was rated highly by 24/7 Sports, played at Washington State. That's kind of why I put him up there. They had a successful season, and 24/7 Sports is the one of the best, if not the best, scouting services for recruiting in the sport. So if they say he's highly rated, but PFF doesn't, well, I'm going to give 24/7 some benefit of the doubt there. That's for offense, though. Michigan needs a lot, like everywhere, on offense. They could benefit from reworking a vast portion of this offensive roster because of how just unproductive and unserious it was in 2024. I mean, seriously, Kalel Mullings deserved better than that offense. Same with Colston Loveland. Same with, like, Tyler Morris, for example, who's transferring out. On defense, I look at defensive tackle where Mason Graham is gone. Kenneth Grant, I don't know if he's officially declared yet. Maybe he has, and I just haven't seen it, but he probably will declare. It'd be awesome if they somehow brought him back, because him and Rayshawn Benny, I think, would contend for being the best defensive tackle duo in the sport. I think Benny is going to be an All-American, but you likely need some depth. And that's where I look at Keyshawn Silver from Kentucky, 26 tackles and a sack. You got Lee Hunter from UCF, 44 tackles and a sack. If Michigan wants to maybe upgrade at defensive end, or at least get someone to replace Josiah Stewart, Will Helt had 5 sacks and 56 tackles at Purdue in a very dysfunctional defense. Imagine what he could do in a better system. And at corner, I'm not looking at linebacker because I think both Barham and Hausman will return. Don't know if they will, but that wouldn't shock me at all. At corner, you have Takario Davis, Tony Grimes, and Emmanuel Camley, who combined have 16 passes defended and 89 total tackles. Tony Grimes previously had interest from Michigan last cycle. Takario Davis and Emmanuel Camley are both from Arizona. Davis had interest from Michigan, I believe, last season, last transfer portal cycle, but he declined and ended up staying at Arizona this year where he had another good season. Defensively, the roster is not as bad or in need of reform as offense, but still, there are a lot of holes at secondary, and I think Michigan, you want to keep that defensive line flowing and working and just being a wrecking ball against opposing offensive lines. You do not want the talent there to drop off if you can help it. It probably will drop off from this year to next year, but you want to minimize that as much as you can. And if possible, well, make it so that it doesn't drop off. So that's who Michigan should target on defense in the portal. Also, Tommy Doman left. He entered the portal, so Michigan is in need of a punter there. Expect Michigan to get probably more than 10 portal commits, I would say, and they're going to get some big names as well. So that's the Wolverines right there. Now we're going to talk about the Buckeyes for the rest of this show, and then that'll be that. So let me read what people are saying in here. Sorry, just getting in. Oh, wow, you're just getting in and it's this late? Wow. JW, my best friend bullied Sharon Moore growing up. Really? Wow. Well, hopefully he's no longer a bully. Let me see. I don't know the timetable of these messages, so yeah, don't know when they were sent in, but thank you for being active in the chat, guys. Now let's talk about Ohio State. So the Tennessee Volunteers travel to play the Ohio State Buckeyes this Saturday at 8 p.m. And this is the most intriguing matchup in the first round of the college football playoff, the first ever 12-team college football playoff, because of the immense pressure on Ryan Day. But also because I think with Tennessee, I know that they're happy to be here, but Josh Heupel is looking for another one of those signature wins. He had one against Alabama in 2022. This, beating Ohio State in the Horseshoe, would be a signature program-changing win for Tennessee. It would be. And to circle back to Ohio State, a win here at minimum restores some faith in the team. You win a playoff game, you get to 11 wins, you finish the year, at least at home, in Ohio Stadium, in the Horseshoe, off on a high note. And Ohio State right now is favored by 7. A lot of people are picking Tennessee, and Tennessee has a lot of advantages in this game. But I think Ohio State has more advantages. That's why I picked them to win. Picked them 31-17 to beat them by the exact same score that Georgia did earlier this year in the regular season. And today, I'm going to tell you why I believe Ohio State wins, why they beat Tennessee. So I'm going to give you 5 of those reasons, actually. Not just some reasons, but 5 reasons. And I encourage you, if you haven't already, to please check out via the link down below at the top of the comment section in the pinned comment. There'll be a link there. Just click on that to watch my Ohio State versus Tennessee preview and prediction video where I talk about some fascinating matchups. I look at the analytics, the starters, the rosters from both sides. Today we're going to be looking at things from the Ohio State perspective because this is a video about why I believe that they will win. Tennessee can win though, so maybe I'll talk about them later this week if you want to figure out if I do though. Again, you got to subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you can get notified when I release more content. But let's kick this off and start off with reason number 5, why I believe the Buckeyes will beat the Volunteers. That is Jim Knowles' adjustments. A lot of crap, and rightfully so, has been dished out to Ohio State's coaching staff. I watched that Ohio State-Michigan game. For context, I'm a Michigan fan. I watched it for all its 60 minutes of game time, it felt like a day watching it in real life. And I was hyperventilating, I was sweating, and I was praying, admittedly, for a Michigan win. And it happened. And I jokingly, well, not even jokingly, I seriously said, in talking about the Michigan OSU game, the only way that Michigan is winning this game is some type of miracle or disaster if you're an Ohio State fan, an anti-miracle, divine intervention, because Ohio State's just that much better than Michigan. And because the staff planned one of the worst game plans I have ever seen, and they executed it, and they tried to execute it until they couldn't, well, that combined with Michigan not giving up and being tough and playing to their strengths resulted in a 13-10 Michigan win. The worst loss that Ohio State, I think, has suffered this century, in the 21st century. So, rightfully so, Ryan Day, Chip Kelly, and I think especially Justin Fry have been given crap. Someone who doesn't deserve any of that is Jim Knowles. Jim Knowles is one of the best defensive coordinators in the country. He commands the best defense in the country, number 1 per S&P+. His unit is first in opponent second half points per game. They, on an average basis, only allow 3.8 second half points per game. Think about Penn State. Penn State currently averages 6.7 yards per play. They're top 4 in that category. Ohio State only allowed 3 points to be scored from that Penn State team in the second half. In the game against Michigan, where Ohio State lost, traditionally it's been all about how, Jim Knowles' defense just collapses in the fourth quarter. Not this time. And even though they couldn't get Michigan off the field much, that was because their offense couldn't do anything. So the defense was on the field tired against a team that has a respectable rushing attack. They held Michigan to 3 in that game. Against Oregon, they shut out Oregon in the third quarter. Oregon didn't score. If memory serves me correctly, Oregon didn't score. They didn't score a single point in the third quarter. They didn't. Ohio State's defense made some adjustments. More importantly, they got a fourth down stop inside of the 5 against Oregon. Now, the offense didn't fulfill the promise that you always make to the defense when you get a stop, like, hey, we're going to score on this drive. Thanks for getting us the stop. They didn't. But the defense, really outside of that Oregon game, for 3 out of the 4 quarters, has been the unsung hero of OSU this year. Jim Knowles has done a better job of getting pressure than he ever has before with Ohio State. The rushing defense is great. The passing defense is great. At times, both of those are even elite, and his adjustments are among the nation's best. Number 4 is superior quarterback play. Nico Imaliava, 5-star out of high school. I thought he was going to be an All-American this year. Well, Will Howard, who I think is, maybe he is an All-American, but he's certainly not the best quarterback in the country. Might be like a second or third team, or maybe even like honorable mention All-American type quarterback. Like near elite, not elite, and maybe just great, because I think this is a pretty down year for quarterbacks as is. Nico Imaliava is none of those things. He's not even a top 15 QB. Will Howard is better than Nico Imaliava in QBR, passer rating, passing yards, completion percentage, yards per attempt, and perhaps most importantly, touchdown to interception ratio. Will Howard is the more accurate quarterback. I don't think he has the same upside now that Nico does. But we have seen these teams play in 12 games, and in almost all of those games, outside of maybe week 1, where Will Howard kind of had a rough introduction to Ohio State against Akron, Will Howard's been the better quarterback. It's just that simple. So we have a large sample size of 12 games that tells us, even in the games where Ohio State has no rushing attack because of their injuries on the O-line, that Will Howard helps produce a much more productive passing offense than Nico Imaliava does with Tennessee. Now, some of that's on the wide receivers. Ohio State has much better wide receivers than Tennessee does. But Nico has 2,512 passing yards, completes 65.7% of his throws, 19 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. His quarterback efficiency rating right now is 35th, a 70.5. Will Howard, on the other hand, 2,860 passing yards, 9.1 yards per attempt, 27 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, 72.3 completion percentage. He has an 83 QBR. That's 7th. So superior QB play, I think, is going to be important in this game because these teams both have receivers with high upside. And another thing to keep in mind is both of these pass protection units are pretty bad in their current state of things. Tennessee's tackles have been awful for the whole year relative to the talent they have on the O-line. And Ohio State's pass protection everywhere has gotten bad as the season's gone on, in part due to injuries, but also they never really had depth. And I don't think outside of Simmons or McLaughlin, they have done a really good job this year at developing. Thanks, Justin Fry. Number 3 is the wide receiver core. And when I say stuff like thanks, Justin Fry, or sarcasm, I guarantee you Ohio State fans are probably more excited or just kind of laughing at that rather than getting annoyed because they don't like Justin Fry either. Number 3 is the explosive wide receiver core that OSU has. And matching that up against a Tennessee passing defense that is good, but relative to other secondaries in the college football playoff is shaky, and nationally is great, near elite, but not elite. They don't have the safeties that Ohio State does. They don't have the corners or just the DBs total that Texas does. They don't. Now, Tennessee is a really good defense, and there is a pathway for them to shut down this Ohio State offense, but I'm talking about reasons why I believe Ohio State will win, not lose. Ohio State will win this game because Jeremiah Smith, Emeka Egbuka, Carnell Tate, and Brandon Inniss have combined for 2,411 yards, 24 touchdowns, and they average 14.2 yards per reception. And because Jeremiah Smith is just so athletic and such an alien that he can beat your best cover guy. That oftentimes for almost any team, the best bet to stop Jeremiah Smith from scoring is to double cover him or to pull him down and draw a PI flag so he doesn't catch the touchdown pass and you live to see another down. This wide receiver core, all of these players I'm bringing up are going to be NFL players at some point. For all of the criticism that has been levied at Ohio State's offensive staff, wide receiver is not one of them. They block well, they run their routes well, they have high effort. Jeremiah Smith might be the best wide receiver in the nation, and he's a true freshman. The only reason he did not win the Biletnikoff, in my opinion, is because he wasn't utilized enough. Like, see the Michigan game or see the Nebraska game. Games where Ohio State tried to physically impose their will on teams through the run game when they should have been physically imposing their will on teams through the passing attack. That's another thing about this Ohio State wide receiver core. They're not just explosive. They're not just finesse. They don't just dance after the catch. They're physical. They get yards after contact. They beat you one-on-one. They're tough. They block well. This is your ideal wide receiver room you're talking about here. The only one that might be better is Oregon, and Oregon is insanely good at wide receiver. So there's no shame in Oregon potentially being better than Ohio State there at wide receiver. This is going to be a tall order for Tennessee to deal with. This is the best wide receiver core they have dealt with by a mile. You thought defending Alabama's receivers was hard with Jeremy Bernard and Ryan Williams. Ryan Williams, I think, is an alien. Bernard's good. They have some other good receivers. But Smith is better than Williams, and Egbuka, future NFL player. Tate could be an alien, and he's been coming on as the year's gone on. And Inniss was also highly recruited out of high school, and from what I've seen, is a pretty physical blocker. Reason number 2 are the Ohio State safeties. That is Jordan Hancock, the nickelback, and then Lathan Ransom and Caleb Downs. Caleb Downs, of course, a legend, a unicorn in his own right at safety. This is their best room on defense. In fact, it might be their best room on the whole team. Their safety room might be better than their wide receiver room, Ohio State's. Downs, Ransom, and Hancock have combined for 149 tackles, 1 sack, 10 passes defended, 3 interceptions, and 5 forced fumbles this year. They tackle well. They read plays properly. They are disciplined. They don't let you beat them over the top. This is the best safety room in the country. Dare I say it's a generational safety room. You have a generational player in Caleb Downs. You have Jordan Hancock, who was awesome as a corner last year, has done well at nickelback. And then Lathan Ransom has been playing out of his mind this year too. So I think these guys right here are NFL DBs. Downs is a first rounder. Ransom is playing like someone who you would classify as a first rounder, though I don't know or think he'll be drafted that high. And Hancock is playing well too. So I think that with Nico and how he has been passing the ball and how his receivers have been catching and just how the passing offense is, they have some upside. Like Dante Thornton, for example, who's a very explosive receiver. Brew McCoy's more the yards after contact guy. They have some receivers. They have some capabilities, but I think this safety room is going to lock them down the same way it did Penn State. Not only that, Tennessee's good at running the football, not because they have an insane yards per carry. They only average 5 yards per carry. That's like about the same as OSU, by the way. But they run the ball for over 40 times per game. Against a safety room like this, who reads plays well, who's disciplined, intelligent, and selfless, they are going to tackle Dylan Sampson well. And they may even force a fumble from him because he's had some fumble problems. So Tennessee's MO is running the ball. These safeties tackle well. And I think that if you're Ohio State, allowing only 10, 13, 17, or even 20 points is a success against Tennessee. The offensive game plan against Michigan was an aberration. It was atrocious, and there was nothing wrong with the defense in that game. They did a pretty good job slowing down Michigan's rushing attack. Was it absolutely perfect? No, but that was because they were on the field for 13 minutes in the fourth quarter, and Mullings broke that long run. For whatever reason, Orji confused him on a long QB run, and also Mullings is as tough as nails. Mullings is a power back with vision and with speed who will always fall forward for an additional yard or two. Dylan Sampson will run the ball. He won't get shut down, but I think the safeties will help limit him, and they'll also prevent Tennessee from getting any big plays over the air. And that should be concerning if you're a Tennessee fan, because the Georgia game was an example of how everything was hard. How when Tennessee converted a third down, it was because the ball was thrown very well and the receiver made a great catch. They were winning one-on-ones almost too much against Georgia in the short to intermediate passing game. It was always everything was hard. And meanwhile, a lot of the drives Georgia had on offense were easier. They looked like they were more replicable. And I think that will play out here as well, where Tennessee might take the lead. They may hang around for the whole game, but I think it'll look easier for Ohio State to score and move the football and also stop their opponent from moving the football. Whereas for Tennessee, I think things will look harder. And I think the safety difference between these two teams is a huge part of it. Tennessee doesn't have bad safeties at all. I just think Ohio State has the best safeties in the entire country, and they don't just have 2 of them like some defenses do. They have 3 of them. And lastly, number 1 is the pass rush mismatch. Going to keep it short and going to keep it sweet because I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Tennessee is 91st nationally in QB sack percentage. Their quarterback gets sacked on 7.45% of his dropbacks. Ohio State is second in sack percentage. They sack opposing quarterbacks on 10.51% of their opposing quarterbacks' dropbacks. That is a major mismatch. Everyone's talking about James Pierce Jr. and Tennessee's D-line against Ohio State's O-line, and that makes sense. I think James Pierce Jr. is going to get pressure on Will Howard and going to have a big day. But people aren't talking about Jim Knowles and his blitzes and Cody Simon and Sonny Styles and Tui Moalau and Sawyer and Williams and Hamilton, who, look, none of whom outside of maybe Simon are elite players, but with a numbers advantage and a great defensive backfield to cover while they blitz against an O-line that's nearly outside the top 100 in the FBS in terms of protecting the QB, that's a mismatch right there, especially in a nighttime environment. So I think this point right here is why OSU wins, and actually why I think they win quite comfortably. This is entertaining, this game, and very intriguing from a narrative standpoint, but from a matchup standpoint, it makes sense why Ohio State's favored the way they are. They've looked better than Tennessee. in almost all of their games throughout the season. And they have matchup edges. I mean, Tennessee does too. And again, wink, I'll potentially talk about them in their own separate video, maybe why Tennessee wins later this week. But Ohio State has their own set of non-negotiables that Tennessee's going to have to deal with. And Ohio State's pass rush is better than Georgia's, thanks to blitzes. Their secondary is way better than Georgia's. Way better. And I would say it's the same thing with their receivers. Their quarterback. I mean, Will Howard's played better than Carson Beck has this season. And it's another road game in a big environment. So Tennessee can win, but I'm taking Ohio State to win 31-17 again. And I think that the defensive adjustments, I think that the explosive wide receiver room, I believe that the defensive line, the pass rush, the fact that Ohio State's pass protection is better than Tennessee, same with their pass rush, that's a mismatch right there. I look ultimately just at the safeties that Ohio State has and just how excellent they are in what they do. They're elite, they're NFL, and that's honestly where I leave it right there, on top of the fact that I believe that they have superior quarterback play. Nearly forgot to mention that, but that's another pretty big thing in this football game. And now, all we have to talk about, did not mean to burp like that live. That's my bad. All we got to talk about now is the portal with Ohio State, because they have not gotten a commitment yet. But I think that they are about to get some commits, because Ohio State got nearly 10 commits last year, and some say, oh, there isn't the same excitement around the program, yada, yada, yada. But I don't know. I mean, you tell me. A lot of people want to go to Ohio State. Why wouldn't you? I mean, if I was a wide receiver, you know where I'd go right now? It'd be Ohio State. It'd be OSU or Oregon is where I would go as a wide receiver. If I were a linebacker, I would strongly favor OSU right now based off of what they've done this year. You also got to, of course, consider like Texas and Georgia. If I were a safety or a corner, more so of a safety, I think they've done a better job developing safeties than corners, I'd be considering OSU. If I were a kicker, I can save OSU's special teams reputation if I go there. I can be a hero because they haven't had good kicking, or at least elite kicking, in some time. Noah Ruggles was underappreciated. He was a good kicker. Wasn't elite, but he was good. A lot more accurate than Jaden Fielding, at least compared to Jaden Fielding of 2024. But let's talk about this, and then we'll be done here. The Ohio State Buckeyes, well, hold on. Ohio State's football season is not over. They have a game against Tennessee this Saturday at 8 p.m. If they win that game, which I think they will, they have to play Oregon on New Year's Day in the Rose Bowl. And from there, they could potentially play Texas or maybe Clemson or Arizona State if there was an upset, and then the winner of the bottom half of the bracket in the national championship game if they win the semifinal. There's a path for Ohio State to win the national championship. They can win the national championship. But that doesn't mean they can't be forward-thinking. And they can't look into the future and think to themselves, we're losing more than half of our starters, potentially close to 75% of our starters. We're losing a lot of our production. We need to make coaching changes. And we also need to win. And we want to beat Michigan. And we want to win the Big Ten. We want to get back to the Big Ten championship game for the first time since 2020. And we want to beat Michigan for the first time since 2019. They're thinking that. They are in the Woody Hayes Center. They're thinking that. So what I want to talk about here is who Ohio State should target and potentially who are they targeting, because I'm not an insider, but I can read articles and I can tell you what people are telling me or what I'm, reading. And there's also some high-level guys in the portal where maybe Ohio State isn't targeting them now, or it's not said publicly they're targeting them, but this is Ohio State. I mean, they're a blue blood. They're one of the best programs in the nation. They've been the best program in terms of consistency since the end of World War II. That's a pretty long time, and they pump out NFL talent. So they're going to be in the running for almost anyone they want to be in the running for. Now, they don't have a commit yet in their portal class, but they have been offering people. They've been hosting visits. Some have failed, like Dylan Thieneman. He didn't even get to his visit to Ohio State. He scheduled one, but then committed to Oregon. So that's that. They hosted Josh Thompson on a visit, who we'll be talking about here. And they have interest in Justice Haynes, running back out of Alabama. I think that the Buckeyes need a quarterback. Now, the staff, from what it sounds like, wants a quarterback from the portal. Some think that they should just try out Julian Sayin. What I will say on that point is you can try Julian Sayin, and I think Julian Sayin is going to be a great QB at Ohio State. I think that he is the future. But that doesn't mean you can't bring in someone to compete with him. Because let's say that Ohio State brings in just some like transfer A, just because I don't want to say a name right now. Let's say they just bring in a senior, or maybe not even a senior, maybe a junior, or maybe even like a sophomore, for example, who's had starting experience. If Sayin is the guy, you'll see it against whoever you bring in. If he is that good and he has the talent to be a dude, to be a dog, to be elite, maybe even be a unicorn based off of what people were talking about him when he was in high school, when he committed to Alabama originally, then transferred to Ohio State, and how he looked in some of Ohio State's spring practices. I mean, there were analysts saying he was going to start for OSU come fall in 2024. I may have even said that. I forget exactly. I think I said Ohio State might be better off starting Sayin in 2024 because of the ceiling that he provides compared to Howard. But he instead saw very limited playing time. And that tells me two things. Either one, Ryan Day just doesn't like playing freshmen, likes to redshirt him. Or two, he may not be as good as everyone thinks he is, at least outside of Ohio State's roster and coaching staff. And I think that just especially with, Devin Brown's entering the portal after the playoff is over. Aaron Noland is entering the portal. Tavian St. Clair is coming in. So you have a subtraction of 2, an addition of 1. You can bring someone in. You can. And Lincoln Keenholz will probably leave for the transfer portal as well. So I think it'd be beneficial for Ohio State to bring in a quarterback here. I do think they need a running back. I thought to myself, wait, Quinshon Judkins might return. He could. He has eligibility. Henderson does not. Henderson's gone no matter what after this year. But will Judkins come back? I don't know. He's had a lot of carries in his career. He clearly has enough upside, talent, and proven production to get drafted in the NFL and have a chance to play and compete for a starting spot in the NFL. So I don't know if he would. I'm going to assume that he won't. So with that in mind, James Peoples has looked good as a third stringer this year, but you probably need at least one running back to come in. I also think Ohio State needs a tight end to come in. I believe G. Scott Jr. does not have any more eligibility. Could be wrong on that front, but even if he does, Ohio State's not been good at tight end. There's been a clear drop-off from Cade Stover to G. Scott, Jelani Thurman, Will Kazmarek from last year to this year. Having a good tight end was so helpful to OSU under Day. I mean, think about it. Jeremy Ruckert in 2020 and 2021, and then Cade Stover in 2022 and 2023. Tough tight ends who are also great receivers. It's so helpful to the quarterback position. I think Ohio State could benefit from a tight end. I think they need a center. I think that Carson Hinsman this year was actually pretty all right, good, above average, maybe even great at guard. When he got put back at center, clear downgrade. Clear downgrade from Seth McLaughlin to Carson Hinsman at center. Now, Seth McLaughlin won the Remington Trophy, and I thought he was the best center in the nation, especially as the year progressed. It became very clear, okay, this guy's like different at center. It's tragic that he got hurt. I hope that his future in the NFL is very bright, that he plays for several years, stays healthy. I'm praying for his recovery. Same with Josh Simmons. The point I'm trying to make is I think that the current production that Ohio State has at center is not good enough. And it may not be fixed by bringing in a new O-line coach. I'm hoping that Day brings in a new and better O-line coach, but I don't know if that'll happen. And even if he does, he may need more than a year or he may need new bodies to work with to fix this offensive line. So I think a center would be good. I think 3 tackles would be good, I believe. Guard play for OSU it's just kind of been what it is. I think it's been better than the center play after McLaughlin was hurt, and tackle play. Ohio State's losing their tackles after this year, losing Simmons, losing Fryer, losing Donovan Jackson. They're returning their guards. So I don't think guard has the same necessity in the portal, but it would still be a one. It would still be good. I think on the defensive line, Ohio State needs some guys because they're losing their starting 4, and they also need a kicker. And also, additionally, they could use another offensive tackle. I heard Day say they wanted like 4 offensive tackles. 3 is a necessity. I think 4 just adds more comfortability, more depth. And I also think a corner and a safety might be good for Ohio State to pick up in the market if possible. Let's look at some of these guys. John Mateer at quarterback. Now, I laugh at this because it's ridiculous, and the fact is he's probably going to Oklahoma, but I want to entertain something here. John Mateer has 3,139 passing yards. He has 29 passing touchdowns, 7 interceptions, 9 yards per attempt, 823 rushing yards, 15 touchdowns, 4.6 yards per carry. This guy backed up Cameron Ward for 2 years. And while he isn't a clone of Cameron Ward, it's not like you're getting Cameron Ward's twin, like identical twin who's just as successful at football, or getting Cameron Ward in disguise. But maybe you are. I mean, Cameron Ward was not a top 10 QB or not top 20 at Washington State in terms of QBR, in terms of efficiency. And he wasn't certainly top 10 by anyone who I think was objective. I mean, maybe he wasn't. I just missed on him that badly. But efficiency-wise, he wasn't top 10. Little bit of a, whoopsie-daisy QB, as Tom Fornelli would say. Little bit everywhere. But this year, he was clearly the nation's best QB. I think he's the nation's most NFL-ready QB. Like Shedeur Sanders, NFL-ready, very talented. Cam Ward's more NFL-ready, though. He's the best QB in the nation. It's really not even close, both from an NFL talent perspective and also from a collegiate performance perspective. Mateer has been one of the better quarterbacks in the nation from just solely putting up numbers and how he's in large part put the team on his back. I mean, let me read you those stats again. 3,139 passing yards, 826 rushing yards. He has nearly 4,000 all-purpose yards in 12 games. And he has 44 total touchdowns, 15 on the ground, 29 through the air. Not going to say Justin Fields, because Justin Fields was elite in college in his own right, but maybe with better coaching, with better athletes surrounding him to help him mature and grow. I mean, because John Mateer is not a senior. I think John Mateer has 2 years of eligibility left. Could be wrong. I think John Mateer is a sophomore. Ohio State can steal him from Oklahoma. Just offer him more money. Ohio State probably has more money potential, more resources than Oklahoma does. Let's just be straight up about that. 6'1", 219 pounds. He's from Texas, but, I mean, Will Howard was from Kansas State and grew up a Penn State fan. Anything's possible. Again, I think it's ridiculous, but I think that if OSU is going to get a transfer QB, you go big. You do what last year you didn't do, where they passed up on Ward to get Judkins along with Henderson and Howard. I think in hindsight, it's better to have one elite QB and one elite running back rather than, as much as I like it as a Michigan fan, I love the power spread. I love destroying people on the ground. Ohio State, though, does not have the O-line to do that. So in their circumstance, it was better to get an elite QB and one elite running back than just a great QB and 2 elite backs. The former was always going to be better with the O-line situation. I think this coming year, I think and hope that Ryan Day learns that lesson. I think that whether it's Mateer or maybe you want to talk about Caden Salter from Liberty, who has some mobility, get a QB with legs who can give you 500 rushing yards and make defenses work like hell to stop your offense, because mobile QB with a good arm, with the elite receivers you have Jeremiah Smith for 2 more years at minimum, the defense that you have with Jim Knowles, and also the fact that if Ohio State plays their cards right, they could have a better O-line next year, get a lot of guys in the portal, get a better O-line coach, the guys who have been recruited or developed rather well, and boom, you have your best offense since 2022. So I think that if you're gonna go in the market for a QB, you go big, because if Sayin is the guy, then Sayin will beat out whoever you get from the portal. Like, he'll straight up beat them out, or maybe he'll lose, but it's a close competition. You think to yourself, okay, we'll pay him. We'll pay Sayin to wait, and we'll pay him a lot to wait because we know that he'll be really good. At running back, Justice Haynes, obviously due to his Ohio State connections from his recruiting days in high school. Justice Haynes, 448 rushing yards, 7 rushing touchdowns, 5.7 yards per carry. I think that Quentin Joyner, 478 yards, 3 touchdowns, 7.6 yards per carry, is another running back to pay attention to. For the tight end spot, you got to look at Max Clare from Purdue. Bringing in Max Clare, I mean, imagine him and like Jelani Thurman, him mentoring a great prospect, very high level player in terms of potential in Thurman in that tight end room. That'd be quite the upgrade. 51 receptions, 685 receiving yards, and 4 receiving touchdowns. And then on the offensive line, I put down several players. I think that Braylon Moore from Virginia Tech, who started there for several seasons, would be a good look. I also think that Isaiah World, Falali Famoe, and Ratrell Perry at offensive tackle would be good looks, and Jordan White and Josh Thompson at guard are good looks as well. Jordan White, 6'2", 300 pounds, 781 snaps, had a 87 run blocking grade and 82 overall offensive grade per Pro Football Focus. Josh Thompson from Northwestern, Jordan White's from Liberty, by the way. Thompson, 6'5", 301, 646 snaps, 74 offensive grade, 82 pass blocking grade, 74 run blocking. He could probably be a tackle, given that he's 6'5", is 300 pounds, and at a really high pass blocking grade, even being a guard, higher than run blocking grade. 82 pass blocking grade is pretty good. I'm not saying he would for sure be. It's just an idea. Not saying it'd be the right move, but just something to put out there. They could use him as a tackle, but he would also be, I think, a near elite to elite guard given the right system. Ratrell Perry is from the FCS, 6'5", 314 pounds, 902 snaps played, so he has some endurance there. 62 overall offensive grade, 65 pass block, and 61 run block. Isaiah World has 854 snaps played. Famoe has 521. Famoe received poor grades overall, 57 offensively, 72 pass blocking, 53 run blocking, but I think that I think he has a lot of potential still, and 24/7 Sports graded him highly. So if PFF and 24/7 Sports have a disagreement there, they're both very good at what they do, but I'm going to give some benefit of the doubt to them because 247 Sports, again, really good. If they're one of the best, if not the best, when it comes to scouting and recruiting news. Isaiah World, 68 offensive grade, 82 pass blocking, 59 run blocking, 6'8", 309 pounds. Best offensive lineman from Nevada. He's in the portal there. That's the offensive outlook. I don't think OSU needs any wide receivers in the portal. I think it's pretty obvious why, due to Heartline's recruiting and development. You look on defense, I think that Ohio State's going to be in line for some players on the D-line. I don't think they need someone at linebacker other than maybe Dasan McCullough, who'd be a nice depth piece, also a developmental piece. Ohio State almost got him out of high school, but then he committed to Indiana, had some good seasons, went to Oklahoma. I think he was dinged up this year or maybe got buried in the depth chart, but he's a good player. I think Ohio State could benefit from him coming in as Cody Simon leaves for the NFL this season. Will Helt and James Williams combined for 70 tackles and 10 sacks at Nebraska and Purdue. Helt from Purdue and Williams from Nebraska. Williams probably will go to Florida State, but money talks, and so does Larry Johnson's name. So those are some names to pay attention to on defense. James Thompson Jr., defensive lineman from Wisconsin, 3 sacks, 2 passes defended, 29 tackles. He is a Ohio kid from Cincinnati, and he's no longer a kid. Recruiting days are over. He's now a man, and to get those numbers at Wisconsin is impressive because that defense good, great. I'd even say near elite, but their strengths were not on the D line. And he was their best defensive lineman. So whoever he commits to is getting a very good player in James Thompson Jr. And then at corner, if you're looking for anyone, I'd say the top corner right now who's available or close to it is Takario Davis. I have mentioned him in terms of Michigan circles or even Penn State circles, or really anyone could benefit from having Takario Davis in their cornerback room. So those are some targets for Ohio State on defense. As for kicker, I don't know who they could get at kicker, but they should try and target someone. They should even throw a lot of money at someone because, especially in the modern world of football, the game's been shortened by the clock rules. Defenses have caught up to offenses, creating some lower scoring games. I think a good kicker is actually more important now than it was a few years ago. Like a good kicker now is more important than it was in 2023, more important than it was in 22, 21, etc. There are fewer possessions, fewer opportunities to score. Defenses schematically have gotten better. Having a kicker, like Michigan having Dominic Zvada, won them that Ohio State game. It did. It gave them that extra win. It helped. So it was also the only reason they didn't really get shut out by Texas. It was really the only reason they didn't get, shut out by the Longhorns. So something to keep in mind there. That's who I think Ohio State should go after when it comes to offense and defense. I think they're probably going to get a class of 10 or more guys. I think they have to if they don't want to take a step back next season. Thank you all so much for stopping in. I know it's late. It's 12:45. I'm literally going to get off and go to bed and wake up early tomorrow. So thank you guys for coming on. Is there any news? Oh, Donald Sneed. Thank you for answering my question. Yeah, I was thinking about Kerry Collins, but I wouldn't have said his name right. I forget what name I was thinking of instead of Kerry Collins, but I was thinking, yeah, probably best Penn State QB since Kerry Collins. But thank you for the name. It was on the tip of my tongue, but I really appreciate you, Donald Sneed. Blue, looks like Sharon Moore got the last laugh. Indeed, he did. I hope he succeeds at Michigan. I hope that Jonathan Smith succeeds at Michigan State. I hope that Ryan Day succeeds at Ohio State. And that's me talking with the Michigan fan cap on. I'm one of the weird Michigan fans that has an affinity for my rivals, and I like to see them succeed. Of course, I want Michigan to crush and beat Michigan State and Ohio State nearly every year. I say nearly because if you do it every year, it's no longer fun. But I think perhaps maybe I'm more of a fan of college football and elite college football than even my own team. But who knows? Thank you for coming on, everyone. Make sure to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. This was a good show tonight, even though it was late. I will see you all very soon, likely Wednesday on a live show, and we do have some more special content throughout the week that won't be posted live, but will be posted on Spotify, YouTube, and all those different platforms